I'm Heather Hayes, 42, and literally last weekend, my rep as the reliable, steady one, the family glue, yeah, it totally backfired. The piece I'd worked my butt off to keep solid, it blew up into a full-on family meltdown at our so-called happy reunion dinner. A certain someone we all know, my father, straight up demanded I stop pretending I've built something real, and when I clapped back, the room went dead silent. "You just embarrassed us," my mother hissed, while my sister Katie stared like I'd just thrown a Molotov cocktail across the table. But here's the tea. Their shade didn't break me, it lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. So drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost funny. You wouldn't believe what they'll do once the truth comes out. Let me back up. I've been a market strategist for 15 years. Not the kind that floats buzzwords in boardrooms. I'm the kind that gets called at 2 a.m. when the numbers don't add up and someone's about to lose billions. The kind who once turned a flailing SaaS firm into a market leader in 18 months. But try explaining that at a dinner table where real jobs start with a corner office, end in retirement gifts, and make room for golf on Thursdays. I was the weird one. The too independent one, always skipping family vacations for another one of your little projects. My brother Dan climbed the finance ladder the traditional way, big-name schools, big-name firms. My sister married rich. And I built my credibility brick by brick, usually alone, and always with something to prove. But every win was invisible to them. They didn't understand what I did, so it must not matter. And the truth? For a while I let that eat at me. I'd downplay my victories, pretend I was still figuring it out, just to avoid the eye rolls. I wore beige, nodded along, laughed when they mocked startups like mine. I betrayed myself every Thanksgiving. But something snapped last weekend. We were at this sleek, overpriced restaurant, the kind with waiters who act like sommeliers and a menu that doesn't use dollar signs. It was Dad's idea. "Let's do something upscale," he said, "so Heather doesn't feel so out of place." The moment I walked in, I knew it was a setup. Mom's smile was tight. Katie barely looked up from her phone. Dan gave me that patronizing shoulder squeeze like I was a dog learning a new trick. I clenched my jaw, smiled back. Then came the toasts. Dan's promotion at Elridge & Co. Katie's new country club membership. My mother's foundation raising a record amount at last month's gala. They all had something to brag about. Me? I was still figuring things out, apparently. Never mind the fact that I'd closed 2 high-stakes negotiations that week alone. Never mind that one of them was with a company Dan's firm had failed to land. I stayed quiet, until Dad looked over his wine glass and said, "So Heather, you ever think of trying something real?" Real. That one word, said with a smile and a scalpel's edge, sliced through everything I'd swallowed for years. And in that moment, I didn't just feel the rejection. I felt the freedom. Because this time I wasn't going to swallow it. I wish I could say that dinner was an anomaly, that the contempt that poured off them in that overpriced room was rare. But no, that feeling? That quiet shame that clings to your skin like humidity? It's been there as long as I can remember. You'd think growing up in a well-off, well-connected family would come with some kind of emotional safety net. But in our house, love was conditional, and praise was a currency they never handed to me. Not unless it could be tied back to their version of success. When I was 12 and won first place at the state science fair, Mom barely glanced at the ribbon. "You'll scare off boys talking about data like that," she said, laughing like it was a compliment. Katie, 2 years younger, got a new charm bracelet for winning most friendly in her 2nd grade class. I learned early my wins made them uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with a daughter who wasn't playing the role, so they ignored me. Not cruelly. Worse. Politely. When Dan got into Stanford, the house erupted. Champagne, catered dinner, a framed article in the local paper. When I got a full scholarship to a top-tier analytics program in Chicago, they told me not to brag too much around Katie, who wasn't really the academic type. When I graduated early with honors after spending 2 summers doing deep-dive internships with emerging startups, nothing. Not even a mention in the family newsletter Mom emailed to close friends. That year's update focused on Katie's wedding planning, and Dan's summer internship at a bank their friend had pulled strings to get him into. They weren't villains. That's the thing. It would be easier if they were, but their neglect was smooth, subtle, the kind that gaslights you into thinking maybe you're imagining the imbalance. Maybe you really are less impressive. Maybe the hours you've poured into your work mean nothing because no one's clapping. So I stopped telling them. I stopped sharing wins. I stopped inviting them to my life. Every time I made a breakthrough, helping a small manufacturing firm rebound after a massive loss, navigating a mid-size retailer through a digital pivot, I celebrated quietly. Maybe with a glass of wine. Maybe with my dog Jasper, curled at my feet. Never with them. And it wasn't just professional stuff. When I got out of a 5-year relationship that was slowly eroding my confidence, I told no one. I'd spent so long playing strong, holding everything together, that even admitting I'd been hurt felt like weakness. And I knew that if I told my mother, she'd say, well, maybe if you'd compromised a little more. They praised Katie's softness, her ability to support her husband's ambition. Me, I was too blunt, too focused, too much. So I built a world where I didn't need their praise. Or so I thought, until last weekend. Until that damn dinner and that knife in the heart comment about being real. That was the moment it all crystallized. Not just the dismissal of my career, but the years of erasure that led up to it. And as I sat there, swirling my untouched wine, my mother leaning over to whisper something patronizing about career phases, I made a decision. If they weren't going to see me, I was going to show them exactly what they missed. The thing they never knew, the thing I never let them know, is that while they were busy pretending I was some sad little career drifter, I was building something, and not just a business. I was building a fortress. A strategy machine. A private consultancy that quietly, meticulously turned the tides for companies in crisis. I started it 6 years ago, during what they thought was my down period, after I left a toxic firm that sucked the soul out of me and almost burned me out for good. They thought I'd taken time off. My mother told her friends I was regrouping. In reality, I was spending 14-hour days consulting under the radar for executives too embarrassed to admit their numbers were tanking. They came to me whispering, panicked. I gave them clarity, gave them structure, gave them hope, and they paid handsomely to keep my name out of the spotlight. Because that's the game in this world. Half of what's really successful happens in quiet rooms, late at night, through people like me. The aha moment came after my 3rd client in 2 months told me, I wish I had a team of people like you. So I built one. I started small. Just me and another woman I'd met years earlier at a financial conference, Celeste, a genius at pattern recognition and trend disruption. She'd been laid off after her company merged and had been struggling to get interviews. She was too intense, they said. I called her the same day. Want to try something different, I asked. She didn't even hesitate. Then came Marcus, an ex-banker with a knack for data storytelling who left Wall Street after his husband passed away and the firm restructured him out. Then Priya, then Omar. Every single one had been overlooked, edged out, or dismissed, and every single one brought something to the table that made us sharper. We didn't post on LinkedIn, we didn't chase clout, we built real results. By year 3, we were running ghost operations for 3 Fortune 100 clients who didn't want to admit they needed outside help. By year 5, we'd turned around 12 companies, helped 2 CEO transitions, and quietly prevented a hostile takeover that would have made national news. No one knew. And I liked it that way. Because I didn't want their validation. I wanted freedom. I wanted to prove that we could rewrite the rulebook without ever asking permission. And we did. Over and over again. But I won't lie, there were nights I wished someone saw it. Nights I wanted to pick up the phone and tell Dan, hey, remember that company your firm dropped last year? They came to me, and we fixed them. But I didn't, because I already knew how that call would go. A long pause. Then, that's cool. Anyway, thus, did you see Katie's baby shower photos? So I kept it to myself. Until, earlier this year, a tech company on the brink of collapse called us in. They'd burned through 3 CMOs and had maybe 3 months of runway left. No one could make the model work. We did. In 46 days. And that success? That win? It was about to become public. Our name, finally, was going to be on a merger announcement that would make headlines, and the night before that news broke? I had dinner with my family. I almost didn't go. The invite came in a passive-aggressive group text from my mother. Dinner this Friday, 7 p.m. sharp. Everyone's expected. Please, no work excuses this time, Heather. No emojis, no smiley faces, just expectation wrapped in obligation. I stared at it for 10 minutes before replying, okay, not yes, not can't wait. Just, okay, because I already knew what the night would be. Polished smiles, loaded questions, subtle jabs about how quiet my life seemed. And now, with everything on the line, our biggest client announcing a formal merger with the backing of our firm, I didn't have time for it. But some part of me, probably the same masochistic part that still hoped they might someday see me, said go. Just one more dinner, then I'd be free. That Friday I spent the day toggling between nerves and control. Our press release had already been drafted. The client's board had signed off. All that was left was one final meeting with the CEO in the morning, and Monday's news cycle would carry our name into rooms that had never heard of us. It should have felt triumphant. But instead, I was dressing for war. I stood in front of my closet scanning options. Too flashy, and they'd accuse me of trying too hard. Too plain, and they'd call me frumpy. I finally landed on a navy silk blouse, black slacks, low heels, understated, professional, unmistakably confident. Jasper, my rescue terrier mix, watched me from the bed, ears perked. I leaned down and kissed his head. Wish you could come with me, buddy. He wagged once, like he knew. The restaurant was one of those minimalist places that charged $46 for risotto and called it elevated. Dad's favorite. They always booked a private room. It wasn't about ambiance, it was about power. Control. Appearances. I was the last to arrive. On purpose. When I walked in, the conversation paused just long enough for everyone to glance up and give me their curated reactions. Katie air kissed the air next to my cheek and said, "You look rested." Dan gave me a head nod, like we were colleagues at a conference. Mom arched an eyebrow at my blouse and murmured, "At least it's not all black this time." I sat down without responding. I'd already used up all my energy keeping my mouth shut that week. The waiter poured wine, menus were ignored, and the toasts began. Again. Dan had landed a speaking gig at a finance summit in Milan. Cheers. Katie's daughter made it into a preschool with a wait list longer than most law schools. More cheers. Mom's foundation broke a record at its latest fundraiser, and then, a long pause. All eyes turned to me. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Heather, what have you been up to?" A silence so loaded you could slice it with a butter knife. I smiled. "You'll find out Monday." They blinked. "Another one of your side ventures?" Katie quipped. I just took a sip of my wine. I didn't need to explain myself, not anymore. But inside my stomach twisted. Not with doubt, with anticipation. They had no idea. And when the truth came crashing through that room, I was going to let it. The first insult came before the appetizers. Dan leaned over as the waiter walked away and said, "So, still doing freelance stuff, that remote gig life?" He grinned, like we were sharing some inside joke about my lack of a real career. I glanced at him, let the smile touch just the corners of my mouth. "Something like that?" He nodded, clearly amused. "I mean, must be nice. Working in your pajamas, no real stress, right?" The table chuckled. Even Mom gave a tiny laugh, covering it with a sip of Chardonnay. I held my gaze on Dan for a second longer than necessary. Yeah, no real stress at all. Except I'd just spent the past 3 weeks managing 3 teams across 3 time zones while negotiating a multi-billion-dollar transition strategy with a CEO who hadn't slept in a month. But sure. Pajamas. Katie chimed in next. "You know, a friend of mine is looking for someone to help with her Etsy shop analytics. I told her you might be perfect for that." There it was, the first real jab, not just ignorance, dismissal. Framing my world as something quaint, small, almost laughable. Something that could be reduced to cute spreadsheets and artisan candles. I didn't blink. "I don't do Etsy." Then added just loud enough, "But tell her good luck with her churn rates. They're brutal this quarter." Her brows twitched, but she didn't bite. The waiter returned with salads and conversation drifted briefly into safe zones. Vacation plans, Palate Studios, Dan's upcoming appearance on a business podcast. But then Dad steered it back. "So Heather, I was talking to a friend at Wilcox Partners. They're expanding. Told him you were between things." I looked up. I'm not between things. He waved a hand. Sure, but you know. Something more structured. Something real. That word again, real. The salad wilted on my plate. I said nothing, and because I didn't take the bait, he kept going. He said he might be willing to meet with you. Of course you'd need to tighten the resume. Some of your, claims, he glanced at Mom, who nodded, seem a little far-fetched. Big numbers, big names. Dan added, honestly I was surprised when I Googled you, couldn't find much. That was intentional. We operated under strict NDAs. Our successes weren't blogged, they were buried beneath confidentiality clauses, the kind of silence you get paid a premium for. But try explaining that to people who measure worth by LinkedIn endorsements. Katie tilted her head. Heather, don't take this the wrong way, but maybe it's time to stop pretending you're something you're not. I put my fork down. There was a sharp ringing in my ears like a train coming. For a moment I didn't trust my voice. Then I smiled, not because I was okay, but because I knew what was coming. The moment it turned was so quiet I almost missed it. Dad was swirling his wine, the stem pressed between his fingers like a judgmental metronome. We've tolerated your detours, he began in that calm, clipped tone he reserved for firing interns or breaking up with assistants. But it's clear now you've made your choice, and we've made ours. I blinked. What choice? Mom folded her napkin neatly, deliberately, placing it beside her untouched plate. You chose to isolate yourself. You chose work over family, over stability, over respectability. Katie nodded, arms crossed. We're tired of pretending your little projects matter, Dan added. Honestly, it's becoming embarrassing, Heather. You show up once a year, barely contribute, and act like you're some misunderstood genius. There it was. The verdict. Dad leaned forward. So here it is, plain, we're moving forward as a family without you. The room went silent. No yelling, no slamming doors, just those words, without you, echoing in the air like gunfire in a quiet street. I let out a slow breath. So that's it. You've made yourself an outsider, Mom said, her voice even rehearsed. We're just naming it now. Katie, ever the cruel perfectionist, added, we didn't want to do this here, but since you're always so busy, we figured this was our only chance. I looked around the table. Not one set of eyes met mine with regret. It was surgical. They weren't punishing me, they were erasing me. I swallowed hard. You think because you've never understood my world it's worthless, Dan scoffed. Heather, it's not that deep. Isn't it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, this isn't about family. It's about control. Dad leaned back. Call it whatever you want, but from now on we won't be including you in family trusts, business referrals, or, frankly, any shared responsibilities. You're on your own. On my own. As if I hadn't already been. A slow heat rose behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. I wouldn't give them tears, not after all the years I spent shrinking myself to fit their table. I reached for my water, took a sip. My hands didn't even shake. Good, I said quietly. I've been on my own a long time anyway. Mom offered a final stab. We just hope you figure things out before it's too late. I smiled. Too late for what? Before anyone could answer, a sharp voice interrupted. Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. We turned. Standing just beyond the open doorway to our private room was a sharply dressed man, grinning wide, disbelief all over his face. His voice carried across the table like thunder in a chapel. Is that Heather Hayes? My heart skipped. No way. The man stepped into view, his face familiar from press releases and boardroom Zooms. It was him, the CEO of our biggest client, of all the nights, of all the restaurants in this city. He walked straight toward me, hand extended, eyes glowing. My God, he said, you're the woman who saved my company. For a split second, no one spoke. I could feel the oxygen drain from the room like someone had cracked a window in a vacuum. My father's hand froze mid-air, still gripping his wineglass. Katie blinked twice. Dan's jaw actually dropped. But the CEO, David Riley, founder and executive chair of Stratwell Solutions, one of the top logistics platforms in the country, was already next to me and was shaking my hand like we were old friends who'd survived a war together. Heather Hayes, he repeated, almost laughing with relief. I cannot believe this. You were the only reason we got through that quarter alive. Our entire board still calls you the miracle worker. I glanced at my family. Dan was the first to try recovering. Wait, you're David Riley? His voice cracked on the last syllable. David looked at him for half a second before turning back to me. I've told your story 100 times, you know that? You saved us. Took a disaster of a marketing plan, a sinking valuation, and somehow, had us investor ready in less than 2 months. That strategy you built? Changed everything. Katie gave a short, stunned laugh. Heather helped you with business? David turned to her, still smiling. She didn't help, she ran the whole thing. Behind the scenes, under pressure, no credit. We offered to name her in the announcement and she declined. Said she preferred the quiet win. I could feel it then. The shift. The way their eyes changed, like they were looking at someone entirely new. Not Heather the burden, not Heather the failure, Heather the force. My father finally found his voice. You're saying, she worked with Stratwell? David looked confused. Worked with? She was Stratwell's turnaround. Her firm is the only reason we didn't get swallowed alive last year. Her firm? Dan echoed, as if the word physically hurt. David's brow furrowed. Wait, she didn't tell you? No, I said quietly, locking eyes with my father. I didn't. Because they never earned the right to know. David patted my shoulder. Look, I'm late for a meeting upstairs, but I saw you through the glass and had to say hello. Seriously, thank you again. If you ever change your mind about staying independent, we'd still love to acquire your team. He turned, nodded politely to the stunned table, and exited. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Silence. Katie finally whispered, You didn't make that up. Nope, I said, calm as the sea. Didn't need to. Dan was already pulling out his phone. Probably Googling Stratwell's merger. Mom just sat there, lips parted, face unreadable. But Dad looked like someone had just flipped the table in his mind. His shoulders sank slightly. Well, he muttered, adjusting his watch, that was unexpected. I leaned forward, fingers clasped on the table. No, I said, voice low, steady. That was overdue. Because for the first time in my life, they were the ones scrambling for context. And I was exactly where I wanted to be. You could almost hear the gears turning behind their stunned expressions. Dan finally cleared his throat. Wait, Heather, why didn't you tell us about any of this? You're running a firm that works with Stratwell? I mean, that's legit. Legit, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. As in finally real enough for you? He looked down, pretending to check a notification. Katie leaned in, her tone suddenly sugar-sweet. I mean, this is amazing, Heather. I had no idea. You should have spoken up sooner. Imagine what we could have. No, I cut her off, gently but firmly. You had no idea because you never cared to ask. You've all spent years mocking what you didn't understand, and now that someone you respect just gave it value, now you're interested. Katie's smile faded. Mom folded her hands like she was about to deliver a sermon. Heather, maybe we didn't say it enough, but we've always believed in you. We were just concerned. You've always been so private, so withdrawn. Private because every time I shared something you used it to cut me down. You called me selfish for focusing on my work. Unstable. Weird. You praised Katie's choice to marry young like it was some moral high ground and treated my independence like a disease. She flinched. Dad spoke then, carefully. We didn't know, and perhaps we judged too soon. But this changes things, I smiled. You're right, it does. He straightened, hopeful. Then maybe we can... No, I said, just that. One word. Their faces froze. I reached for my purse slowly, deliberately. My voice didn't shake. You wanted to cut me off? Good, because this family's version of love comes with conditions I don't accept anymore. And now that you see value in me, now you scramble. But I'm not here for scraps. I never was. Dan tried to backpedal. Heather, come on. We were just surprised, that's all. Don't, I said, standing. Don't try to rewrite it. You were clear. You disowned me 5 minutes before someone powerful made me visible to you. But here's the thing. I was never invisible. You just refused to look. Katie folded her arms. So what now? You're just gonna walk out like some triumphant hero? I tilted my head. No, Katie. I'm walking out like someone who finally sees her own worth, and no longer needs yours. The waiter came in at that exact moment to clear the plates. I turned to him. Could you add my meal to their tab? They said I'm not family anymore. He blinked, unsure whether to laugh. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past him, through the double doors of that private dining room, heels clicking on the tile like a punctuation mark. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to see the aftermath. I already knew. For the first time in my life they were left behind. and I was free. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked 3 blocks through the warm spring night and ducked into a small bar I'd discovered years ago, back when I was still working out of coffee shops and praying invoices cleared on time. Low lights, vinyl booths, a jazz trio in the corner, no questions asked. Celeste was already there, seated at our usual spot nursing a Negroni. She looked up and immediately read my face. "Dinner was that good, huh?" I slid into the booth, exhaled. "They disowned me." Her eyes widened, then softened. "Finally?" I laughed, really laughed for the first time all night. "Yeah, I guess." She clinked her glass against mine. "To freedom, then." We sat for a moment in the easy silence that only comes when someone knows you to the bone, no performance, no armor. Omar arrived 10 minutes later with his signature bourbon and sly grin. "Heard you went nuclear at the country club." "It was a restaurant," I muttered. "And I didn't go nuclear, they did. I just refused to shrink." He leaned back impressed. "Damn right you didn't." And then Priya, a whirlwind of energy in ripped jeans and a leather jacket, slid into the last seat. "Tell me you recorded it." I shook my head. "Didn't need to, it's seared in my brain forever." They laughed, and then they listened. Really listened. I told them everything. How my dad laid it out like a boardroom memo. How Katie tossed her jabs like confetti. How they tried to unravel my entire identity in under 10 minutes. And how it all turned the second David Riley walked in and said my name like it meant something. They didn't interrupt. They didn't try to make it better. They let me speak until I had nothing left. And when I finally went quiet, Celeste reached over and squeezed my hand. "They tried to bury you, Heather, but they didn't know you were the seed." I rolled my eyes, smiling. "That's cheesy." She grinned. "Yeah, but it's also true." I looked around the table at these people, this brilliant, bruised, battle-hardened crew I'd built a life with. We'd all been passed over once, labeled too loud, too old, too ambitious, too much. And yet, here we were, running circles around the companies that once wrote us off. This was my family now, no bloodline required, no performance necessary, just truth. And in that moment, sitting in that booth with 3 people who would jump into a fire for me, I felt it. That warm, full, real thing I'd spent decades chasing from people who could never give it. Belonging. The messages started the next morning. At first it was just one, short, clipped from my mother. "Call me when you can, your father is concerned." Then another from Katie an hour later. "Maybe we overreacted, can we talk?" And then Dan, "Look, I didn't mean to come off that way, I just thought you were going through something. Let's clear the air." I stared at the screen and felt nothing. Not anger. Not validation. Just a tired kind of clarity. They weren't reaching out because they understood. They were reaching out because the power had shifted, because someone important had called me important, because the social currency they'd once denied me suddenly had a value they couldn't ignore. But I wasn't the same Heather anymore, so I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the whole thread to my assistant with a note. "If anyone from my family contacts you, politely decline on my behalf. I'm not accepting calls or visits at this time." Then I opened a fresh document. It was time to make this boundary legal. By noon, our firm's attorney had drafted a personal engagement clause that formally removed all familial referrals and joint investments from our client roster. It was a line in the sand. I would not leverage my work to benefit people who tried to erase me. I signed it digitally and archived it in our internal system. Click. Done. After that, I cleared my calendar for the rest of the day and did something I hadn't done in years. I walked through the city with no agenda. No meetings, no pressure, just me. I wandered past the old office building I used to temp in, where I'd once eaten cold tuna sandwiches on the fire escape, while dreaming of something, anything more. I stopped at the bookstore where I'd spent broke weekends skimming leadership books I couldn't afford to buy. I even passed the coffee shop where Celeste and I had scribbled our first business plan on a napkin between cappuccinos. Every street corner held a version of me I'd outgrown, but never forgotten. And for the first time I realized, the fortress I'd built wasn't just to protect myself from them, it was to prove to myself that I could exist without their permission. And now, I no longer needed their silence to give my voice weight. I had weight all on my own. Later that evening, when yet another text came in, this time from my mother saying she'd like to start over, I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. And that peace started the second I stopped waiting for them to get it. 2 weeks after the dinner, the press release went live. Stratwell announces merger backed by quiet Titan consultancy Hayes & Co. My name was right there in the subheading. No more NDAs, no more anonymity. It was surreal, watching the news cycle light up, watching my inbox flood with requests from firms who'd once ghosted me, recruiters who'd once dismissed me as overqualified, and yes, even Wilcox Partners, the same company my father tried to pawn me off to. Their email subject line, potential acquisition inquiry, let's talk. I almost laughed out loud. We did talk, but on my terms. Not because I wanted their offer, but because I wanted to look the system that tried to box me out square in the eye and say, I built something you can't buy. I took the meeting flanked by Celeste and Priya, the three of us dressed like the future. The managing partner did his best to play charming. You've built something truly unique, he said. We think there's real synergy here. Synergy, I echoed, smiling politely. We get that a lot lately. He made a pitch. Something about streamlining our back end, scaling global, offering resources we couldn't match. I waited until he finished, then leaned forward. You once called Celeste too volatile for enterprise-level planning. You told Omar he was a diversity risk, and you rejected my portfolio because you thought I embellished my numbers. His smile flickered. Now you want to acquire us. He shifted in his seat. Well, the market's changed. No, I said. We changed it. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out. Not with anger, with clarity. Because we didn't need their name on our letterhead. They needed ours. Instead of a sale, I redirected their interest into a different kind of deal. A partnership with conditions. Their executive review board would undergo bias training. A percentage of every new contract would fund a scholarship program for underrepresented analysts, and I'd have final review on their hiring rubric revisions. They agreed. And just like that, the firm that once saw me as a risk became a pipeline for change. Not out of goodwill, out of necessity. That was the day I realized legacy isn't about recognition, it's about impact. So I started the Hayes Fellowship, named not after a dynasty, but after a woman who was never supposed to succeed. We fund business education and mentorships for women over 35 trying to re-enter the workforce. The kind of women who get called over the hill before they ever get a chance to lead. We've already placed 9 fellows in leadership roles across 5 industries, and we're just getting started. Sometimes, I still hear from people who used to doubt me. They send polite congratulations, they want to reconnect. No hard feelings, right? But I'm not interested in old apologies. I'm interested in new systems, and burning down the ones that tried to erase me. Because I didn't just rewrite my story. I rebuilt the entire page it's printed on. It happened on a Tuesday. No drama, no headlines, just me, sitting on my balcony with a mug of coffee watching the early sun filter through the trees. The city was starting to hum below, horns, dogs, the distant clang of construction, but up here, it was quiet, and for the first time in years, so was my mind. I wasn't racing through to-do lists, I wasn't composing emails in my head or rehearsing future confrontations, I was just still. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. I smiled, not a forced one, not the kind you wear when you've got something to prove. A real smile, wide and deep and unhurried, because it had finally sunk in. I didn't need to earn anyone's respect anymore. I already had mine. For so long, I'd chased external validation, from teachers, bosses, dates, clients, and especially from the family who saw me as a problem to be solved, not a person to be celebrated. I thought if I worked hard enough, made enough, proved enough, they'd finally see me. But I was never invisible. I was just inconvenient to their version of success. And that's not my burden to carry anymore. The dinner, the rejection, the walkout, even the surprise recognition, they were all catalysts. But the real transformation happened in the quiet aftermath, when I realized I didn't have to perform for anyone else's approval ever again. I built something powerful. I surrounded myself with people who value truth over pedigree. I drew a line and defended it, and I'm still here, thriving, not because I was lucky, but because I finally believed I deserved to exist on my own terms. Now when I walk into rooms, I don't shrink. When I speak, I don't soften. And when someone asks me what I do, I don't hesitate. I lead a firm that saves companies, and sometimes the people inside them. Then I wait, and if they get it, great. If they don't, even better. Because peace isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of self. And mine is finally whole. Have you ever spent years trying to prove yourself to people who only saw what they wanted to see? That used to be me. Chasing nods, earning gold stars, thinking if I just hit one more milestone, they'd finally accept me. But here's what I've learned. It's not your job to convince anyone of your worth, especially not the ones who only clap when it benefits them. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever been the invisible one at the table, the one dismissed, the one told you were too much or not enough, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one thing about you they never saw but you're proud of anyway? I want to hear it. Say it out loud. Say it for you. And if my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear. It's okay to define success on their own terms. Especially someone who's been made to feel like their quiet power doesn't count. You don't need their permission. You don't need their applause. You just need the truth. And the truth is, you already are everything they said you weren't. You're the builder, the storm, the miracle they never saw coming. So go light your own fire. And when they finally show up to feel the warmth, make sure you remember this. You didn't need them to start it. You just needed you.